She was just trying to buy her daughter a simple cone, but when his card got declined, a stranger behind them paid and didn't walk away. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The ice cream parlor smelled like sugar and memories. The soft churn of machines, the jingle of the front door, the faint laughter of children, it all wrapped around them like a warm summer memory, even though it was barely spring. Emily pressed her mittened hands to the glass, her breath fogging it slightly. Her eyes scanned the rows of pastel-colored dreams. She didn't rush. She studied them like they were rare gems. "Mint chocolate chip," she declared, turning to her dad with absolute certainty, as if she'd made a life decision. Michael smiled faintly, already pulling out his wallet. "You sure? Not bubble gum? You liked that last time." "Nope," Emily said, eyes locked on the green swirl with dark chocolate chunks. "Mint. It's like brushing your teeth, but with sprinkles." He chuckled under his breath. Leave it to her to make even dessert sound responsible. He stepped forward, nodding at the teenage clerk behind the counter. "One kid's cone, mint chocolate chip." As the clerk scooped, Michael thumbed through the crumpled bills in his wallet, 3 ones and some change. He knew he had a 10 in there earlier. Gas, school supplies, a loaf of bread. The 10 was gone. He reached for his card, hesitating for a heartbeat before handing it over. The beep was too loud, too fast. Declined. He blinked, then tried again. Another beep. No approval. His ears burned. Hang on," he mumbled, reaching back into his wallet, searching for anything. Loose quarters. Dignity. Behind him, Emily had already taken the cone with both hands and was licking it carefully, unaware of the red creeping up her father's neck. "It's okay, Dad," she whispered, when she saw the look on his face. "We don't have to get it today." But she was holding it. He turned to the clerk. "I'm sorry, can you just maybe hold it for a minute? I'll run to the car." A voice from behind, calm, confident. "It's on me." Michael turned, startled. A woman stood behind them, sunglasses pushed up into her dark hair, her tone casual but firm. "Add a second cone," she told the clerk. "Same flavor, 2 spoons." Then she smiled down at Emily. Ice cream tastes better when it's shared anyway. Michael couldn't meet the cashier's eyes. The second beep might as well have echoed across the entire shop, bouncing off glass cases and pastel walls, loud enough to hush even the noisy blender behind the counter. He felt it in his chest, a sharp pinch that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the 7-year-old standing beside him. Emily looked up, her smile faltering, but still hanging on like a child does when she senses something is wrong but doesn't know how bad it is yet. She held the cone gently, careful not to let it drip. "Is it broken?" she asked softly, glancing at the card in her dad's hand. Michael forced a smile. "Just a little hiccup, sweetheart." The cashier, barely older than a high school student, shifted awkwardly behind the counter. "I can cancel it if—" "No, it's fine," Michael said quickly, sliding the card back into his wallet like it had burned him. He wasn't sure what stung more, the decline or the way the boy couldn't look him in the eye afterward. He turned to Emily, crouching low so they were eye to eye. "We might have to come back another day, kiddo, okay?" She nodded slowly, her eyes lingering on the melting ice cream. "Okay," she said, but her voice was quieter now. He took the cone from her hand, set it gently on the counter, and reached for her hand. She took it without protest, her mittens brushing his calloused fingers. As they turned to leave, her head dipped slightly, the way it did when she was trying not to cry, but didn't want him to see. And just like that, the air felt heavier, not because of the money, not really, but because this was the kind of thing that stayed with a kid. Not the flavor she didn't get to taste, but the look on her dad's face when he had to say no. Again. Michael held her hand tighter as they stepped toward the door. The bell jingled above them, far too cheerful for how he felt. And somewhere in the back of his mind, A familiar thought returned. He was trying, but was trying ever going to be enough? She hadn't meant to linger. The woman in the black coat and oversized sunglasses had only stopped in for a coffee while her car charged across the street. But the moment she stepped inside the pastel-colored shop and saw the man crouching beside his little girl, something in her paused. He wasn't begging. He wasn't making a scene. He was doing everything in his power to exit with dignity. And yet, the disappointment hung in the air like a bitter aftertaste. The little girl's mittens dangled at her sides. She didn't cry. She didn't pout. She just looked down at the floor like maybe if she stayed quiet, the day would fix itself. The woman stepped forward before she gave herself time to talk herself out of it. "I've got it," she said simply. The cashier looked up. The man turned. The girl blinked. The woman didn't remove her sunglasses, didn't explain. Just pulled a sleek black card from her wallet and placed it on the counter, her nails perfectly manicured, her posture calm and composed. "Add a second cone," she added. "Same flavor, and 2 spoons. The cashier hesitated, then nodded and rang it through. The card cleared in seconds. No surprise. But the quiet gasp the man made as he watched was louder than any transaction. "Ma'am, that's not necessary," he said, already reaching for his wallet again. "We're okay, really." She didn't flinch. "You're clearly trying. That's more than okay." Her voice was smooth, steady, the kind of tone used to giving instructions, not asking permission. But there was warmth in it, too, like she wasn't doing this for attention, like she didn't need anything in return. Michael looked at her, really looked, and for the briefest moment, he wondered who she was. Not just her name, but the life she walked in from. People didn't usually look like her in places like this, not with coats that crisp or watches that expensive. But before he could ask, she knelt down and handed the fresh cone to Emily, who smiled so wide it could have cracked winter. "Thank you," the girl whispered. The woman's lips curved upward. Ice cream's always better when it's shared. Emily took the cone like it was made of glass, gently, reverently. Her eyes sparkled, not just because she had it again, but because it had returned to her hands like a tiny miracle. Mint chocolate chip, just like she asked, swirled high and already starting to drip down one side. She looked up at the woman with a wonder only kids can muster. Michael opened his mouth to say something, to thank her, to argue, to apologize for not being able to provide something so simple, but nothing came out. He just watched as Emily's small fingers clutched the cone, her mitten dangling from her wrist like a forgotten worry. Then the woman turned to the cashier. "Could I get an extra spoon?" The boy behind the counter blinked, then quickly handed her a white plastic spoon. She took it and crouched beside Emily, tapping her gently on the arm. "Think you can share a bite?" she asked. Emily's smile widened like she'd just been asked to join a secret club. She nodded eagerly and held the cone out, careful not to spill. The woman took a modest spoonful, then sat on the nearest bench without a word, as though this moment had been planned all along. Michael stood there frozen, his daughter sitting with a stranger, sharing ice cream like they'd known each other for more than 60 seconds. Emily offered another bite, laughing now, cheeks pink from the cold and the sugar. And the woman? She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't showing off. She was just there, present, steady, and impossibly calm. Michael finally exhaled and joined them, hands in his coat pockets. "You didn't have to do that," he said, voice quieter now. The woman looked up at him, sunglasses hiding her eyes. "I know." He searched her face for motive, but all he saw was sincerity, no pity, no performance. "I'm Michael," he said finally. She smiled. "Rachel." Emily looked between them, then back at the cone. "Want a bite, Dad?" He chuckled, kneeling down. "Don't mind if I do." And just like that, 3 strangers shared a cone, 1 spoon at a time. The wind had picked up by the time they stepped outside, swirling little flecks of grit across the sidewalk and tugging at Emily's scarf. She held the last bit of her cone like a treasure, carefully licking the melting edges. Michael walked beside her, hands deep in his coat pockets, jaw still tight from the embarrassment he hadn't quite shaken. But Emily wasn't thinking about that. She skipped over cracks in the pavement, humming softly to herself between licks. She looked up at her dad and said, "She was really nice, huh?" Michael nodded. "Yeah, she was." They turned down the narrow street that led home, past shuttered storefronts and faded picket fences. Michael tried not to think about the unpaid gas bill or the worn-out soles in Emily's shoes. He tried to focus on the fact that she was happy, at least for now. That mint chocolate chip had bought them one peaceful moment. That was something. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Behind them. Steady. Unhurried. He glanced back and there she was. Rachel. Her hands were tucked in the pockets of that expensive black coat, and her sunglasses had slipped down just enough for him to catch a glimpse of her eyes. She wasn't pretending to be subtle. She wasn't pretending anything at all. She was just there. Michael slowed slightly. "Everything okay?" he called back, trying to keep the suspicion out of his voice. She nodded, unfazed. "I realized I'm parked a few blocks that way." She gestured ahead, the same direction they were headed. "Thought I'd take the scenic route." Emily didn't question it. She just grinned. "You can walk with us if you want." Rachel shrugged. "I'd like that." So they did. Michael, unsure of what to make of it, walked with half his attention behind him. But Rachel didn't press. She didn't ask questions. She just kept pace, quietly, like she belonged there. The ice cream cone was gone by the time they reached the worn picket fence of their rental house. Emily ran up the steps, her backpack bouncing behind her. Michael turned to Rachel. "You sure your car's this way?" She smiled. "Not really, but I figured I'd follow something honest for once." The house wasn't much. Peeling paint curled away from the wooden siding like it had given up the fight long ago. A cracked window near the porch sagged under the weight of a duct-taped repair, and the front steps creaked like they resented every footfall. The roof? Well, the roof hadn't stopped leaking since the first snowfall, and Michael had patched it with a blue tarp he got on clearance from the hardware store. It fluttered in the wind like a flag of surrender. Emily didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but chose not to care. She bounded up the steps, her boots thudding across the worn porch. "I'll grab my crayons," she shouted, as she pushed open the front door, the screen clattering behind her. Michael lingered on the walkway, turning just enough to catch Rachel's eyes, and instantly wished he hadn't. She wasn't judging. That was the problem. She wasn't looking at the crooked gutters or the missing shingle or the way one of the porch columns leaned like it had arthritis. She was just present, calm, still standing there in her sleek coat like she'd wandered onto another planet and decided not to flinch. He cleared his throat. "Thanks again. For what you did back there." Rachel nodded. "It was just ice cream." "Yeah," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "But you didn't have to." "I know." Silence sat between them for a beat too long. Then a new sound joined the scene, a soft, rhythmic dripping. Michael looked up toward the edge of the roof, where water slid down a warped gutter and landed in a paint bucket he'd wedged beneath it weeks ago. He winced. Rachel followed his gaze. "Spring rain's coming soon." "Don't remind me," he muttered. She offered a small smile. "Do you need help with it?" Michael shook his head quickly. "Nah, got it under control." He didn't, not really, but admitting that felt heavier than the roof itself. Rachel didn't push. She just looked up at the sagging awning, then back at him. "Well," she said gently, "if you ever decide to let someone lend a hand, you know where to find me." And with that she turned and walked back down the sidewalk, her heels clicking softly against the concrete, leaving behind the scent of vanilla, questions he wasn't ready to ask, and a man trying to hold together a house that leaked from the roof, and somewhere deeper too. Michael stood in the doorway with one hand braced on the peeling frame, watching Rachel's figure retreat toward the sidewalk. He wasn't sure what he expected, maybe for her to drive off in that sleek, too-perfect car and never look back. That would have been easier, cleaner, the kind of moment he knew how to file away in his memory. But the next morning, her knock came just after sunrise. Emily was still brushing her teeth when he opened the door, hair tousled, flannel sleeves rolled up from a long night of working on someone else's busted truck. Rachel stood there with 2 cups of coffee, no sunglasses this time, and a look that said she'd already made up her mind. "I brought breakfast," she said, holding out a paper bag. Michael blinked. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because Pop-Tarts aren't breakfast." He hesitated, then stepped outside, pulling the door half closed behind him. "Look, I appreciate what you did yesterday. Really. But this?" He gestured to the bag. "You don't have to keep showing up." "I know." "Then why are you?" Rachel handed him one of the coffees. He didn't take it. "Because I've been where you are, Michael," she said, quiet but firm. "Different roof, same weight." He looked away, jaw tight. "You don't know anything about me." "Maybe not," she admitted. "But I know what it's like to feel like asking for help is the same thing as giving up. It's not." He crossed his arms, the lines on his face deepening. "I'm not a project." Rachel didn't flinch. "I don't think you are. I've got it handled." She studied him for a long moment. "Then why do you look like you haven't slept in a week?" The silence that followed was heavier than anything they'd said. Finally, Michael sighed, stepping back toward the door. "I fix things, Rachel. It's what I do." "And who fixes you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took the coffee from her hand with a mumbled thank you and slipped back inside, closing the door gently, like he was trying not to admit how badly he needed warmth that didn't come from a space heater or a half-broken radiator. Rachel could have taken the hint, the closed door, the clipped tone. The way Michael's eyes dropped to the floor whenever she got too close to something real. Most people would have stepped back, maybe sent a polite text, and let the moment fade. But Rachel wasn't most people, and somewhere deep down, Michael already knew that. That afternoon, while Michael was buried under the hood of a customer's rusted-out station wagon, Rachel showed up again, not with coffee this time, and with crayons. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself, just walked quietly to the edge of the porch where Emily sat cross-legged on the old welcome mat, a coloring book spread open in front of her, pages fluttering in the breeze. A purple crayon was tucked behind her ear like a mechanic's pencil. "What you drawing?" Rachel asked, crouching beside her. Emily looked up and blinked. Then she grinned. "It's our house," she said proudly, pointing to the lopsided drawing. "But I made the roof look normal, not leaky." Rachel smiled, sitting on her heels. "That's some serious imagination." "I like to fix things with pictures," Emily added, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out a fresh set of colored pencils, neatly boxed. "Think you can show me how?" Emily's eyes widened. She nodded quickly and scooted over, patting the porch beside her like they were already old friends. From the driveway, Michael glanced up, wiped sweat from his brow, and froze. He saw them there side by side, one woman in tailored jeans and designer boots coloring the crooked outline of a too-small house like it was the most important thing she'd ever done. He wiped his hands on a rag and took a step closer, but stopped himself. Something about the scene made him feel like an intruder in his own life. But for once, it wasn't a bad thing. Rachel didn't try to talk to him, didn't make a speech. She just colored, listened, and laughed when Emily did. And in that quiet space where crayons met compassion, something shifted. Not loud, not fast, but enough. That evening, the sun dipped low behind the cottonwood trees lining Maple Street, casting long shadows across the driveway. Michael stood beside his truck, arms crossed, watching as Emily waved goodbye to Rachel from the porch. Crayon smudges covered both their hands like badges of honor. It was the first time in weeks Emily hadn't asked what was for dinner, with a worried look in her eyes. Rachel walked toward her car slowly, as if she wasn't quite ready to leave. The sleek white vehicle sat like a foreign object against the cracked pavement and faded picket fence. Quiet, clean, and far too expensive for a town like this. "Passing through, huh?" Michael said, wiping his hands on a shop rag as she neared the curb. Rachel turned, her expression unreadable. "That's what I said." "Strange choice of car for a detour," he added, nodding toward the electric coupe. "Most folks around here stick to used Fords." She smirked. "I don't do most things like most folks." He tilted his head, catching the glint of her diamond-studded watch beneath the sleeve of her coat. "You said you were between cities." "I am. And business?" "Also between." It wasn't a lie, not exactly, but something in the way she said it told him there were chapters of her story she wasn't opening just yet. Maybe she didn't trust him. Or maybe, he thought, she just didn't want this, whatever this was, to change too fast. "I'm not looking to pry," Michael said. "But you don't exactly blend in." Rachel glanced back toward the porch where Emily was now lost in her drawings. "Maybe I'm tired of blending." He didn't know what to say to that. He hadn't expected her to stay past the ice cream, hadn't expected her to know how to sit beside a kid and make her feel like the most important artist on earth. And he sure hadn't expected the woman in the luxury car to keep showing up like she belonged in the rust and rhythm of his life. She stepped toward the driver's door, paused, then looked back. "Sometimes passing through is the only way to find what sticks," she said quietly. Then she drove off, taillights fading into the dusk, leaving behind more questions than answers, and a man who wasn't sure why he hoped she'd come back again tomorrow. Dinner was simple: boxed macaroni with canned peas stirred in, and 2 slices of toast, slightly burnt on one side. Emily didn't complain, she never did. She just hummed softly as she helped set the table, placing the mismatched forks and chipped plates like it was a fine dining affair. Michael sat across from her, exhaustion tugging at the corners of his face, but pride holding him upright. The living room lamp flickered once, then again. Michael glanced up but didn't react. A third flicker, and everything went dark. Emily froze, mid-bite, the fork clinking gently against her bowl. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows just enough to sound like a warning. Rachel had been dropping off a forgotten scarf Emily left in her back seat earlier. She was halfway up the walkway when the porch light blinked out. She paused, watching the faint silhouette of the kitchen dim to black. Her footsteps quickened. Inside, Michael rose from the table, moving on instinct. He grabbed the old flashlight from the kitchen drawer, clicked it twice until it flickered weakly, then set it upright in the center of the table like a makeshift lantern. The warm cone of light glowed against Emily's wide eyes. "Just the fuse?" he said casually, even though they both knew it wasn't. He didn't look at the empty socket where the power meter used to spin with life. Emily nodded, quiet now. She pushed her peas around with her fork, her appetite fading as quickly as the heat from the food. Rachel knocked once and pushed the door open slightly. "Everything okay?" Michael didn't flinch. "Yeah, power's just acting up again." She stepped inside slowly, taking in the flashlight, the half-eaten dinner, and the way Emily tried to pretend she wasn't scared. Rachel looked at Michael, her voice calm, but edged with something deeper. "You want me to call someone?" He shook his head. "It'll come back." But he didn't sound like he believed it. Rachel didn't argue. She simply walked over to Emily, knelt beside her chair, and whispered, "You know what I used to do when the lights went out?" Emily blinked. "What?" "Pretend I was camping." Emily smiled, just a little, and in the shadows it was enough. The morning came colder than usual, with frost creeping across the windows like tiny veins of ice. Michael pulled on his flannel, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs, and tiptoed past Emily's room, where she still slept curled in a nest of blankets, her little fingers wrapped around a stuffed bear that had lost one eye. The kitchen was quiet, too quiet. No hum of the fridge, no soft buzz from the heater that never quite did its job. The power hadn't come back. He rubbed his hands together and stepped outside, hoping the sun might offer something the inside couldn't. But instead of silence, he heard it. A low, steady hum, unnatural for their street. It came from around the back. His boots crunched over gravel and frosted leaves as he rounded the corner, and there it was. A generator. Shiny, new. Definitely not his. He blinked. The thing was already running, cables leading to the breaker box like veins delivering life to a sleeping body. On the top, taped just beside the fuel cap, was a yellow sticky note with 2 words written in neat handwriting, "For her warmth." Michael stared at it for a long time, jaw clenched. He didn't need a signature to know who had left it. He wanted to be angry, wanted to see it as charity, as another rich person throwing solutions at problems they didn't really understand. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like someone had listened, someone had seen the shiver in Emily's shoulders and decided it wasn't acceptable, even if Michael was too proud to ask for help. He stood there for a full minute, unmoving, the cold biting at his ears, the hum of the generator soft and unrelenting. Then he sighed and walked back inside. The lights were already on. The heater kicked in with a groan. Emily padded into the room, rubbing her eyes, hair wild and full of sleep. "It's warm," she said, smiling. Michael nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Outside, the generator kept humming, quiet, steady, like someone who refused to leave, even when the door stayed closed. The week passed in quiet shifts and small changes. The generator stayed. So did Rachel. She didn't show up every day, but when she did, it was always simple. An extra sandwich for Emily's lunch, a ride home when the sky threatened rain, a stack of sketchbooks left on the porch with a note, "For your house designs, future architect." Michael didn't say much, but he noticed, and he felt it, that strange pull between gratitude and unease, between wanting her around and not knowing how to fit her into the patched-up rhythm of their lives. Saturday rolled in cold and bright. Emily tugged at his hand, insisting on another trip to the ice cream shop, this time with enough change counted carefully in his palm. Mint chocolate chip, 2 scoops. A small celebration. As they waited in line, Rachel appeared like she always did, unannounced, without drama. Just there, a faint smile, sunglasses perched in her hand, dressed in jeans and a gray wool coat that somehow still looked like it belonged in a catalog. Michael nodded toward her. "You following us?" She raised an eyebrow. "Maybe I just like good ice cream." They stepped up to the counter, greeted by the same teenage boy from before. His eyes flicked to Rachel, then widened just slightly. "Hey, aren't you—" He paused, tapping a laminated magazine page tacked up beside the register. "That looks like you." Rachel didn't even glance at the cover. "It's an unfortunate angle," she said dryly. Michael leaned over to look. The page showed a glossy feature from some business publication, Women Who Built Empires Before 30. Front and center was a younger version of Rachel, poised on the steps of a mirrored office tower, arms crossed, confidence radiating like sunlight. His stomach dropped a little. She didn't offer an explanation, just paid for the cones before he could reach for his wallet. As they stepped away from the counter, Michael looked at her carefully, words slow and unsure. "So you're not exactly passing through, are you?" Rachel took a bite of her cone and smiled. "Depends what I'm looking for." Emily didn't notice. She just reached up and asked if someone could hold her second scoop so she could tie her shoe. Rachel took it without hesitation, like she'd been doing it forever. Maplebrook had always been the kind of town where nothing went unnoticed. A new haircut, a missed Sunday service, the exact hour someone's porch light burned out, people noticed. Not out of malice, but out of habit. Life here moved slow, so attention filled the gaps. And Rachel Sinclair didn't exactly blend. She didn't drive an old pickup. She didn't shop at the corner grocery or wait in line at the bank with a paper withdrawal slip like the rest of them. Her car alone, a sleek, silent thing that looked like it belonged in a showroom, turned heads every time it coasted past the gas station with its flickering neon sign. At first, people thought she was lost. Then, they assumed she had family in town. But when she kept showing up, at the hardware store, the bakery, the school parking lot, rumors started to thread themselves through conversations. "She's probably scouting land," one man muttered over coffee at the diner. Big city types buy up property, tear everything down, and call it revitalization. "No," the waitress said, wiping down a table. "I heard she's dating someone. That mechanic with the kid. What's his name, Turner?" The whispers didn't stop there. Emily's teacher asked gently one day if there was a new family friend walking her home. A neighbor noticed Rachel fixing the crooked porch railing with Michael one afternoon and mentioned it casually at the pharmacy. "Just saying, she doesn't look like she's here to fix gutters." Michael heard pieces of it, not directly, not yet. But the air felt different, colder, like the whole town had stepped back just enough to watch. He didn't say anything to Rachel, and she didn't bring it up. But one afternoon, as they sat on the steps watching Emily chalk hearts on the driveway, Rachel turned to him and said quietly, "Do you ever get used to being talked about?" Michael stared out at the road. "You don't. You just learn which voices matter." She nodded slowly, then added, "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." The sun dipped behind the rooftops, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Let the town whisper. Some stories they'd have to live first, before anyone else got to write the ending. It was tucked under the sugar jar, a smooth cream-colored card with raised lettering and a name that shimmered faintly under the morning light. Rachel Sinclair. No phone number, just her name, a minimalist logo, and a private email address printed in the smallest possible type. It looked expensive, like the kind of thing you don't hand out unless you expect to be remembered. Michael stared at it as he sipped his lukewarm coffee. The toast burned again. The breaker had tripped when the microwave and the heater ran at the same time, the kind of problem Rachel's world probably didn't even have a name for. He didn't pick the card up, not right away. Instead, he finished his coffee, tied Emily's laces, made sure she wore her thicker scarf, and walked her down to the school bus. She waved as it pulled away, and he stood there for a moment longer than usual, breathing in the cold and the quiet. When he came back inside, the card was still there, still glowing with that quiet, polished confidence. Michael finally picked it up and turned it over. Blank on the back. Of course, he didn't hate her. He didn't resent the help. He wasn't blind to what she was doing. Gentle things, small things. Never forceful, never loud. But this card, this felt like a line in the sand. A door opened with expectation. A reminder that she wasn't just Rachel, the woman who drew houses with his daughter and fixed porch steps without asking. She was Rachel Sinclair, the name people whispered about now when they passed him at the store. He looked at it for one more second, then walked to the trash can, lifted the lid, and let it fall. No drama, no flourish, just gravity. Later that afternoon, when Rachel returned to drop off the jacket Emily had left in her car again, she noticed it missing from the table. She didn't say anything, but when Michael thanked her, genuinely, without flinching, she nodded, smiled, and left without asking if he'd kept it. He hadn't, because in his world, people didn't introduce themselves with cards. They showed up. Or they didn't. The garage smelled like dust and endings. Michael had sensed it coming. Every empty bay, every delay in ordering parts, every time the boss skipped over his name when assigning weekend shifts. Still, when the words finally came, "We're letting you go, Mike. Just can't keep everyone right now." They hit harder than expected. He nodded, said he understood, shook hands like a man who still had options, then walked out the back door instead of the front. His tool belt clanked softly against his thigh as he crossed the lot. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down like it knew. The check they handed him wouldn't last a month, maybe 3 weeks if they skipped the heater a few nights and stretched every canned soup in the pantry. But the real weight wasn't in his wallet. It was in his daughter's face. He picked Emily up from school like he always did. She ran to him, backpack bouncing, mouth already moving a mile a minute, about something she painted in class. He smiled the whole time, nodded at the right beats, asked questions, laughed once, and it almost sounded real. She didn't notice anything was off, not yet. Kids are brilliant at reading people, but also mercifully willing to believe that things are okay when you tell them they are. At home, he reheated spaghetti and let her watch cartoons. He sat beside her on the couch, mind 1,000 miles away, chewing on numbers and timelines and prayers. She leaned against him, humming with the show's theme song, small and soft and entirely unaware that her world had shifted that morning. Later, when she fell asleep on the couch, crayon still in hand, he carried her to bed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then he stood in the kitchen with the lights off, the refrigerator humming like it didn't know they were broke, and stared at the calendar pinned to the wall. Rent was due in 12 days. He rubbed his eyes, exhaled through his nose, and whispered, "We'll be okay." Because if he didn't say it out loud, he wasn't sure he'd believe it himself. The rain started just after noon, soft at first, then steadier, drumming against the school's windows like an anxious rhythm. Michael had called ahead, asking the office to let Emily know he'd be late. The borrowed truck he was using had a flat, and the spare was just as bald as the tires he couldn't afford to replace. He hated asking favors, but it was either that or leave her standing in the cold. Rachel showed up instead. She didn't go into the building. She stayed in her car, letting the wipers hum back and forth across the windshield, waiting. Her SUV was too clean for the gravel lot, its leather interior too soft for Maplebrook's edges. But there she sat, patient, still, until Emily appeared through the front doors, pink backpack in tow, and a puzzled look on her face. The passenger window rolled down. "Need a lift, Em?" Emily blinked, then lit up. "Rachel!" She climbed in without hesitation, shaking off her wet jacket and buckling herself in. Rachel handed her a juice box from the center console, like she'd anticipated this moment. "I thought my dad was coming," Emily said between sips. "He is," Rachel replied. "But he called the school, said he was running late." Emily nodded, looking out at the rain. "It's okay. I like riding with you." The SUV eased onto the road, gliding over the puddles like they weren't even there. Inside, the world was warm and quiet, the seats heating automatically, soft music playing low in the background. Emily stared out the window for a while before speaking again. "Have you ever seen the ocean?" Rachel glanced over. "A few times, yes. It's beautiful." Emily sighed. "That's what I think. I want to see it one day, the real one, not on a screen." Rachel turned down the music. "What would you do if you saw it?" "I'd just stand there," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And listen. I bet it sounds like forever." Rachel's hands tightened ever so slightly on the wheel. When they pulled up to the house, the porch light was already on. Michael stood there, still in his oil-stained flannel, worry etched into his brow, until he saw Emily laughing in the back seat. "And Rachel?" She just gave him a small nod. No explanation, no expectations, just two people carrying a child's dream through the storm. It started with the smell. Warm, rich, and unfamiliar, the kind of scent that didn't come from a can or a microwave tray. Michael stepped onto the porch and paused, confused. For a second he thought maybe a neighbor's window was open, but the closer he got to the front door, the more he realized it was coming from inside. He opened it slowly. Rachel stood barefoot in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, moving with surprising ease between the stove and the counter. A pot simmered gently, something bubbling inside that looked like actual food, not leftovers, not survival. Michael froze in the doorway. "What are you doing?" Rachel looked up, calm as ever. "Making dinner?" He glanced at the table. It was set. Real plates, actual forks. A jar of wildflowers, probably picked by Emily, sat in the center like it had always belonged there. "You didn't have to do that," he said, trying not to sound like it bothered him. But it did. A little. Rachel stirred the pot without looking at him. "You've fed me enough times. Figured it was my turn." He crossed his arms. "All I had in the fridge was sandwich meat and expired yogurt. I brought ingredients." Of course she had. He didn't say thank you. Didn't know how. Instead, he walked over to the sink, rinsed his hands, and leaned against the counter like a man trying not to feel out of place in his own home. Emily burst in from the hallway, crayon still smudged across her shirt. "Is that pasta?" she gasped. Rachel laughed. "Lasagna, sort of. Don't judge me on presentation." Emily darted to the table and sat like she hadn't eaten in days. Michael stayed where he was, skeptical, tired, uncertain. But the moment Emily took her first bite and let out a dramatic, something shifted. It wasn't just the food, it was the laughter. Full and bright. The kind that filled the walls. The kind Michael hadn't heard in days. He looked over at Rachel. She didn't gloat. She just plated another slice and slid it in front of him. And for the first time in a long while, dinner didn't feel like another thing to survive. It felt like coming up for air. The dishes were done, the table wiped clean, and Emily had fallen asleep curled up on the couch, still holding a crayon in one hand and a drawing of the ocean in the other. The house was quieter than it had been in days. No cartoons, no clinking plates, just the soft hum of the generator outside and the occasional creak of the old floorboards adjusting to the night. Michael stood by the kitchen window, arms folded, staring out at nothing. Rachel leaned against the doorway watching him. He hadn't said much since dinner. Not thank you, not good job. Not even his usual gruff sarcasm, just quiet. She waited a moment longer before speaking. "Why won't you let anyone help you?" Her voice wasn't sharp, it wasn't accusing, it was just real. Michael didn't turn. His jaw clenched. He shifted his weight, rubbed the back of his neck, and exhaled like the words had been waiting. "Because they always leave," he said. Rachel said nothing. "I've had friends disappear the minute the job dried up. Family who said they'd be around and stopped answering calls when Emily got sick that one winter." He paused. "Even her, Emily's mom, left in a different kind of way, but still, gone's gone." Rachel stepped farther into the room, slow and deliberate. "I'm not them." "That's what everyone says. At first." He finally turned. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. "People mean well, but life gets heavy, and when it does, they get moving. I stay because I have to." Rachel nodded, absorbing it without flinching. "But you're breaking while pretending you're not." "I can't afford to break." "Then let someone carry a piece of it with you," she said softly. He looked at her for a long time, studied her face. The steadiness, the patience, and the stubbornness underneath it all. "I don't know how," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Rachel smiled, not triumphant, just gentle. "Start small," she said. "Like dinner, like crayons, like staying." Outside the wind picked up again, but inside the house held still. And Michael didn't walk away. The fire was dying down, a soft amber glow flickering low in the hearth. Emily was asleep again, this time tucked under a faded quilt on the living room floor, a fort of couch cushions built around her like a castle. Rachel sat in the armchair, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. Michael sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, silent. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens when you trust someone not to fill it. Rachel's gaze drifted toward the mantel. Amid the clutter, old batteries, a tiny school trophy, a broken clock that still hadn't been fixed, stood a single framed photo. It wasn't large, just a 4x6 in a simple wooden frame, the edge worn where fingers had picked it up too many times. Rachel leaned forward slightly. A woman, soft smile, kind eyes, hair pulled back with a few strands falling loose like she didn't care about cameras. Her arm was wrapped around a younger Michael, and her other hand rested on a baby Emily's shoulder. The photo radiated ease, like this was a woman who had made a home out of nothing and loved every second of it. Rachel didn't ask. She didn't need to. Michael followed her eyes. When he saw what she was looking at, he sat back slowly, his shoulders stiffening like armor. "She was everything," he said quietly. "Grace." Rachel looked over at him. "That was her name," he added, his voice thinner now. She made this place feel like more than just walls and nails. She could make dinner out of 2 ingredients and turn bills into a game, so Emily wouldn't worry. Rachel stayed still. Michael rubbed his hands together, staring into the fire. It's been almost 4 years. People stop asking after the first, start expecting you to just move on, like grief comes with an expiration date. He paused. I didn't want Emily to grow up thinking the world owed her anything. So I work. I stay tired. I patch roofs and fix broken things because it's all I've got left to give. Rachel didn't offer a speech, didn't reach for his hand. She just whispered she'd be proud. And for once, Michael didn't argue. The kitchen table was a mess of math worksheets, broken pencils, and a half-eaten apple that had rolled dangerously close to the edge. Emily sat in the middle of it all, legs swinging beneath the chair, a determined crease between her eyebrows as she stared down the numbers like they were personal enemies. Rachel leaned over the paper, her sleeves rolled up, her hair falling slightly out of its loose knot. "All right," she said gently. "Let's look at this one again. If you have 3/4 and you spend 2 dimes, how much do you have left?" Emily groaned and rested her head on her arm. "Math is the worst." Rachel smiled. "Only when it pretends to be hard." Michael watched from the living room, pretending to be reading the paper. In reality, he'd been listening for the last 10 minutes, quietly amazed at how patient Rachel was, how Emily listened to her without that usual grumble, how the house felt a little fuller when Rachel's voice echoed off the walls. Emily lifted her head again, pencil tapping against the worksheet. She worked it out slowly, then scribbled down her answer. 55 cents, she announced proudly. Rachel gave a slow clap, over the top and dramatic. Genius at work. Emily beamed and went back to the next question, the tip of her tongue sticking out in concentration. When she solved it, she slid the paper across the table. Thanks, Ray, she chirped without thinking. Rachel blinked. Michael lowered the newspaper. Emily didn't seem to notice what she'd said until she caught their expressions. She looked up. What? That's your name, right? Ray? Rachel blinked again, then smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile she used for business meetings or photo ops or polite conversations. It was softer, warmer, the kind that crept in slowly and refused to leave. Yeah, she said. Ray works just fine. Michael didn't say a word, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward just enough for Rachel to notice. And from that night on, she was Ray. Not Miss Rachel, not Ms. Sinclair, just Ray. Like she'd always belonged at that table, in that mess of pencils and laughter. The sound of a car door slamming wrong was unmistakable, just off enough to make a mechanic wince. It was Rachel's SUV. The driver's side door had started sticking last week, groaning slightly every time she opened it. She hadn't said a word about it, neither had Michael, but he noticed. He always noticed. That morning, while Rachel walked Emily to school, Emily holding her hand, mid-story about a dream she had where they all lived on a boat made of ice cream, Michael grabbed his tools and quietly got to work. The SUV was still warm from the drive. He crouched beside it, pried open the interior panel, and adjusted the hinge tension first, then realigned the striker plate. The latch had worn down, just enough to throw everything out of sync. A small fix, but the kind that could wear out a door over time. He didn't ask permission, didn't leave a note. By the time Rachel returned, the car was back in place, looking untouched, except when she opened the door. It moved smooth as silk. No groan, no drag, just the soft click of everything finally fitting the way it should. She paused, ran her fingers along the edge of the door, smiled. Later, over dinner, sandwiches and tomato soup, nothing fancy, Rachel looked across the table and said, "You fixed it." Michael shrugged. It was starting to catch. "I didn't ask." "You didn't have to." He didn't meet her eyes when he said it, just kept sipping his soup, like it was a sentence that didn't require anything more. Rachel leaned back in her chair, watching him. You fix things when they're broken, even when nobody's looking. Michael wiped his mouth with a napkin and gave a half smile. I don't know how to do anything else. Rachel didn't push the moment, but her hand brushed against his when they both reached for the salt, and this time neither of them pulled away. The call came just after sunset, when the kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast and Emily was on the living room floor building a city out of cereal boxes. Michael was fiddling with the back door latch again, determined to stop the draft that kept sneaking in. Rachel's phone buzzed once, then again, the screen lighting up with a name she hadn't seen in weeks. Charlotte, office line. She stepped outside to take it, letting the screen door ease shut behind her. The night was still, the kind of quiet only a small town could hold. Crickets, distant dog barks, and the hum of the generator Michael still hadn't replaced. She swiped to answer. "Rachel," came the voice on the other end. Polished, clipped, efficient. "You've been gone too long." Rachel closed her eyes. "Hello to you, too." "I'm serious," Charlotte said. "You missed the third quarter meetings, your name's off the Monday agenda, and a reporter's asking if you've stepped down. Are you stepping down?" "I'm not stepping down." "Then you need to get back." Rachel exhaled slowly, staring up at the dark sky. "I needed space." "We gave you space," Charlotte said, not unkindly. "But the board's not going to sit around much longer. They're circling, and if you're not in that chair, they'll find someone else who will be." Rachel didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Somewhere inside she heard Emily laugh. "Look," Charlotte added, her voice softening, "you built this thing from the ground up, but the machine doesn't stop just because you needed a break. You either get back in the driver's seat or someone else takes the wheel." The line went quiet after that. Rachel stood there a moment longer, phone still pressed to her ear even after the call ended. She looked back through the kitchen window. Emily was now drawing something at the table, crayon scattered, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth. Michael stood behind her, pointing to the paper, smiling. Rachel placed the phone on the porch rail and wrapped her arms around herself. She'd built a company, sure, but this felt like something harder, and maybe something worth staying for. Rachel folded each shirt with care, though she had no idea why. It wasn't like she owned anything wrinkled. Her suitcase sat open on the edge of the guest bed, the one with the creaky frame and the quilt Emily insisted she use. Every soft thud of fabric landing in the suitcase felt louder than it should, like it was announcing something she hadn't found the words for yet. She hadn't told Emily, not yet. Michael leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her in silence. He didn't ask what she was doing. He already knew. "I got a call," she said finally, not looking up. "They need me back in the city." He didn't answer. "I'll leave in the morning." More silence. Rachel zipped up one side of the suitcase, the sound slicing through the quiet. "It's not forever. I need to figure out where I'm supposed to be." Michael shrugged. "Makes sense." She looked over, surprised by how flat his voice sounded. "I mean," he continued, "you were never really staying. Not for good." Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it again. It wasn't the reaction she expected. She had braced herself for disappointment, maybe even anger. But this indifference? It hurt more than she'd admit. Down the hall, Emily's small footsteps padded into the room. She stopped short when she saw the suitcase. Her eyes widened. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. Rachel knelt. "Just for a little while?" "But why?" Rachel smiled gently. "Because sometimes grown-ups have to go where their work takes them." Emily frowned, her lip trembling. "But I thought you liked it here, with us." Rachel reached out, brushing hair from the little girl's cheek. "I do, more than I expected." Michael stepped in then, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Hey, it's okay, Bug. People leave sometimes." Emily looked up at him, confused. Rachel looked away. That night, Rachel sat on the edge of the bed long after the lights were out, listening to the quiet house breathe around her, wood groaning, the generator humming, and the faint sound of a little girl crying softly in her sleep. She wondered if she'd already made the wrong choice. The knock came just before sunset. Michael had been scrubbing grease off his hands in the kitchen sink, letting the warm water run too long just to fill the silence. Emily sat at the table, coloring with quiet focus, but she hadn't spoken much all day, not since Rachel had told them she was leaving. When the knock came, he didn't move at first. He just stared at the water swirling down the drain. Then another knock, gentler this time. He dried his hands on a towel and walked to the door, bracing himself for a neighbor, a delivery, or maybe even no one at all. He didn't expect her. Rachel stood on the porch, wind in her hair, sunglasses pushed up on her head, and in both hands, ice cream cones, mint chocolate chip, 2 scoops each, perfectly swirled, already starting to melt in the soft spring air. "I thought we could share," she said. Michael stared, trying to read her expression, trying to understand why the woman who packed her suitcase the night before was now holding dessert like it was an apology. "You're supposed to be gone," he said, voice low. "I know. Flight delayed?" "Nope." "Second thoughts?" She smiled. "Maybe?" From behind him, Emily's voice cut through the stillness. "Is that for me?" Rachel held one of the cones out, her hand trembling just slightly. "Of course it is." Emily ran past Michael, grabbed the cone with both hands, and hugged Rachel around the waist before burying her face in the ice cream. Michael stepped out onto the porch, letting the screen door creak behind him. Rachel turned to him, the second cone still in her hand. "You said once that people always leave." He nodded. "Well," she said, "I've done that before. Left, ran, fixed problems with distance." She handed him the cone. "But this time," she added, "I want to stay, if you'll let me." Michael didn't speak right away. He took the cone, took a bite. Cold, sweet, familiar. Then he looked at her, the hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Just don't eat the last bite," he said. "That's the best part." Rachel laughed, a sound that settled somewhere deep, and just like that the cone came full circle. The porch was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that wrapped around the house like a blanket. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, still sticky from the last bites of mint chocolate chip, a smudge of green at the corner of her mouth. Inside, the TV played low, some old cartoon looping in the background, but neither of them paid it any attention. Michael sat on the steps, forearms resting on his knees, eyes trained on the gravel driveway, like it held answers he hadn't asked for yet. Rachel sat beside him, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, knees pulled close under her borrowed flannel blanket. They hadn't spoken much since she returned with the cones. Not about her job, and not about her suitcase. Not about what any of this meant. So when Michael finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual, less guarded. "Why'd you really come back?" Rachel didn't answer right away. She stared out into the dark where the porch light barely reached. The wind rustled the trees, and somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then went quiet. Michael waited. She finally turned to him, her expression unreadable at first, then suddenly just open. "Because for once," she said, "I didn't feel alone." He looked at her, really looked at her. "People think money makes you untouchable," she continued. "But all it ever did was build walls, big glass ones that look beautiful from the outside. But inside, it's just echo." Michael didn't interrupt. "I spent years surrounded by people who said yes because they had to, who smiled because it paid. And then I came here, to this tiny town with your rusted porch and your duct-taped heater and your daughter who asks the most beautiful questions about the ocean." She smiled then, small and real, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, human. Michael leaned back against the step, exhaling through his nose. "So what now?" Rachel shrugged, her shoulder brushing his. "I don't know, but I'd rather figure it out here." He nodded once, the silence between them no longer heavy. Just full. The gym smelled like glue sticks, powdered lemonade, and too much sugar. The annual Maplebrook Elementary fundraiser was in full swing. Folding tables lined with handmade signs, brownies wrapped in plastic wrap, and raffle tickets being hawked by fifth graders in crooked paper hats. Parents buzzed about, juggling toddlers and juice boxes, trying to raise money for a new playground that probably wouldn't be built until next spring. Michael stood near the back, watching Emily run toward the bake sale table with a paper crown on her head and frosting already on her cheeks. He'd brought 24 store-bought cookies, the kind that left a weird aftertaste but were all he could afford to contribute. Then the crowd shifted, and there she was, Rachel. No limo, no tailored coat, no heels or designer purse, just jeans, sneakers, and a plain blue flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, a clipboard in one hand, a tray of homemade lemon bars in the other. Heads turned. The same people who had whispered in checkout lines and passed quiet glances at the gas station now watched her walk across the gym floor like she belonged there. And somehow she did. She greeted the principal like an old friend, high-fived a second grader who had jelly on his chin, helped tape a raffle sign back to the wall when it started peeling. When a kid dropped a tray of cupcakes, she was the first on her knees with napkins and a smile. Michael approached slowly, a paper cup of flat lemonade in one hand. "You bake?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "I YouTube." He chuckled. "You're not exactly subtle showing up like this." "I'm not trying to be." He nodded toward the clipboard. "So what? You're in charge now?" "Assistant to the assistant treasurer," she said with mock pride. "Emily insisted." He smiled, looking around at the tables, the noise, the warmth. "You know they're all watching." "I hope so," she said, scribbling something down. "Let them." And for the first time the whispers didn't feel sharp. They felt curious, like maybe they were starting to believe that the woman with the perfect nails and powerful name was more than just a headline. She was part of something now, even if that something was a school fundraiser with too much glitter and not enough chairs. The wind kicked up early that Saturday, carrying with it the threat of another spring storm. Michael stood on the porch roof, hands braced against weather-warped shingles, eyes squinting against the overcast sky. The leak above Emily's room had started dripping again, and if he didn't fix it now, the next rain would turn her ceiling into a sponge. He heard the door creak open below, followed by soft footsteps on the porch. "Need a hand?" Rachel called up. He peered over the edge, raising an eyebrow. "You own a power suit, not a toolbox." She held up a pair of work gloves borrowed from his shed. "Guess it's time for a promotion." Before he could argue, she was already climbing the ladder, steady and unfazed. When she reached the top, she didn't wait for instructions. She knelt beside him, pulling her hair back with a bandana Emily had loaned her, bright pink, covered in stars. They worked in tandem. Michael loosened the warped shingles. Rachel held them steady. He applied the patch. She nailed it down with more confidence than most of the apprentices he'd trained over the years. She didn't flinch at the dirt under her nails, didn't complain when tar stuck to her jeans, didn't once check her phone. After a while, the rhythm of it settled between them. Hammer, hand, nod, pass. He found himself stealing glances when she wasn't looking, amazed that someone like her could kneel beside him in grit and sunlight and act like she'd always belonged there. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. Rachel looked up, hair stuck to her temple, gloves stained. "Because it matters." "What does?" "This roof. That room, her sleep, your peace," she smiled. "All of it." Michael didn't respond. He didn't have to. They finished just as the first drops of rain tapped the tin gutters. Rachel stood up, stretching her back, her face smudged and glowing. He handed her a bottle of water, and for once he didn't try to hide the grin pulling at the edge of his mouth. "You're not bad at this." She sipped and shrugged. "Told you, I YouTube." The storm rolled in quietly, but the roof held strong. So did the moment. The living room was a scatter of crayons, loose paper, and cookie crumbs. Michael sat on the couch, tightening a bolt on the wobbly coffee table, while the TV murmured some cartoon neither of them were really watching. Rachel was at the table helping Emily sound out spelling words, her hair pulled into a messy bun, a smudge of flour still on her elbow from earlier. They had made cookies that afternoon, burnt on the edges, but Emily had called them perfect. At some point, Emily grew quiet, focused, the kind of focus that only happened when she had a story to tell and a crayon to tell it with. She didn't say anything as she worked, just hummed softly, lips pursed in concentration, scribbling colors and outlines and little hearts in corners. When she was done, she stood and walked across the room, holding the paper like it was gold. She handed it to Rachel first. "I made us," Emily said proudly. Rachel blinked, looking down at the drawing. 3 figures, one small with curly hair and a purple dress, that was clearly Emily. One tall with brown scruff on his face, arms outstretched, that was Michael. And in between them, hand in hand, was a third figure, long hair, blue shirt, smiling. Rachel. Beneath the 3 of them, written in bright, uneven letters, was one word: us. Rachel stared at it, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. Michael looked up from the couch, caught the expression on her face, and stood. He took the drawing, glanced at it, and then looked at her, really looked. Emily beamed. "I can hang it on the fridge?" Rachel crouched beside her. "I'd like that." So Emily ran to the fridge, slapped it on with the strongest magnet she could find, a blue one shaped like a fish, and smoothed it flat. Michael stayed quiet, his hands now still. Rachel straightened, wiped her eyes once, quick and subtle, then turned to him and said softly, "I didn't know how much I needed that." He just nodded, voice caught somewhere deep in his chest. And on the fridge, in crayon and construction paper, their truth hung quietly. No ceremony, no permission, just us. The idea came over coffee, like most unexpected things do. They sat on the back porch, the morning sun cutting through the clouds just enough to warm their faces. Emily was still asleep inside, curled beneath the ocean print blanket Rachel had surprised her with last week. The house was quiet, the town even quieter, the kind of rare, calm moment Michael never trusted to last. Rachel cradled her mug, fingers tapping against the ceramic like her thoughts were trying to find their shape. "I've been thinking," she said. Michael raised an eyebrow. "That's always dangerous." She smiled but didn't back down. "About staying. For real." He didn't respond. He just sipped his coffee and waited. "There's this property downtown, empty auto shop. Great bones, awful wiring. Been on the market for months." Michael looked at her sideways. "You trying to flip garages now?" She shook her head. "I want to start something. Not for profit. For people." He set his mug down slowly. "I've watched you," she continued. "You fix things for people who can't afford to ask. You teach Emily without even realizing it. What if we created a place for that? A garage that trained single parents, people who need a second chance, maybe even a first one, real skills, real pay, dignity." Michael stared at her like she'd spoken another language. "I'd fund it," she said simply. "No strings. You run it. We build it together." He leaned back, arms crossed, the silence stretching between them like a held breath. He thought about the bills still stuck to the fridge with Emily's fish magnet. Thought about every layoff, every broken heater, every person who had helped him with nothing but words. And then he thought about what it would mean to give someone else a shot, to change the shape of someone's life with a wrench and a little belief. He looked at her, steady and certain. "You sure you want to do this here?" Rachel smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything." He didn't hesitate this time. "Then let's do it," he said. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something he had to survive. It felt like something he could build. It started with a whisper, like all things in Maplebrook. A teacher mentioned it to her sister. A bakery clerk told a customer. A retired reporter overheard two parents chatting at the school fundraiser about that Sinclair woman and the mechanic she never seemed to leave. And then came the knock. Rachel opened the door one afternoon to find a young woman in a blazer 2 sizes too big, clutching a notepad and trying not to look nervous. "Hi, I'm Lily Harper. I write for the Maplebrook Sentinel. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." Rachel didn't blink. "About what?" Lily straightened. "Well, about how you ended up here, in this town, in that garage." Rachel glanced past her shoulder where Michael stood in the driveway, teaching Emily how to change a tire on an old rusted bicycle. She turned back and smiled. "Come in," she said. The article ran the next weekend. Front page, a photo of Michael and Rachel standing outside the newly repainted auto shop, the words "Sinclair and Turner Trades" painted across the sign. Emily stood between them, holding a wrench too big for her hands and grinning like she owned the world. The headline read, "Billionaire buys a cone, finds a family." It was light, sweet, the kind of story that made people pause over their morning coffee and feel, for a moment, that the world might not be so cynical after all. But beneath the headline, the story went deeper. It talked about grief, about single parents, about second chances built from rusted tools and mint chocolate chip. It talked about a man who refused to give up and a woman who finally stopped running. And the garage they built, not just for fixing engines, but for repairing dignity. By Monday, the shop had a line of people out front, not for gossip, but for applications. Some wanted to donate. Others wanted to learn. One just asked if he could sweep the floor and watch. Michael folded the paper that night, setting it on the kitchen table. Rachel looked at him. "You okay with it?" He nodded slowly, then grinned. "It's a better headline than 'Mechanic Wins Lottery.'" She laughed. "You kind of did." And he didn't argue. The morning was like any other. Emily scrambling to find her other shoe, Michael sipping coffee in yesterday's shirt, and Rachel standing at the stove flipping pancakes that were slightly too golden on one side. Sunlight slanted in through the kitchen window, catching the dust in the air and making everything feel quieter, softer, like the world had paused to take a breath. Emily sat at the table stuffing crayons in a squished juice box into her backpack. Rachel packed her lunch, careful to tuck the napkin between the sandwich and the apple slices like she always did. Only this time she slid something else into the brown bag too. A small folded note, simple, quiet. No glitter, no flourish. The bus honked outside. Emily kissed Michael on the cheek, hugged Rachel around the waist, and grabbed her bag without looking inside. "Love you both. Wish me luck on the spelling test." "Knock 'em out, champ," Michael called after her as she ran to catch the bus, her shoes finally a matching pair. The house settled back into its morning hush. Rachel leaned against the counter, watching the empty doorway. "I put something in her lunch." Michael glanced up from his coffee. "What, a surprise cookie?" She shook her head. He waited. "She'll read it before lunch," Rachel said. But it wasn't for her, really. That got his attention. What did it say? Rachel met his eyes, calm, unwavering. It just asked, "Would it be okay if I stayed?" Michael didn't move for a second. Then he set the mug down, slow and steady, and crossed the room until he was standing inches from her. No ring, no crowd, no music swelling in the background, just the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of everything unspoken between them. "You think she'll say yes?" he asked. Rachel smiled. "She already has. I just needed you to catch up." He leaned in, forehead resting lightly against hers. "Took me long enough." And outside, the bus rumbled down the road, carrying a lunchbox with a note that would change everything.